Today I have with me Rocco Million. It's an awesome name, by the way. Is that a stage name or?
No, that's my actual
That's
real
right.
name.
Oh, that's cool, man.
Yeah, Rocco Thomas Million.
So thanks for coming on the show, man. Yeah, I found Rocco online. I've been interested in MMT now for about a year nearly, and so finding you was quite exciting. You've got a lot of energy, and you're getting the message out there, man. And so firstly, I'd just love to talk a little about how the process was for you, because I mean, for me, it was quite a eye-opening experience.
Yeah, for me, I think everybody, we all start off kind of brainwashed with this right-wing neoliberal economic, lies that we're all brainwashed with. And so, I was pretty much like everybody else. Actually, I started off in politics on the right. I was more of like a right-wing type of person. I was in the Navy. I voted for W. All of that. And then, I started, as I grew up and I experienced more of life, I saw that, I was talking bullshit. I couldn't justify my rationale anymore. So my position started to evolve. And I found myself voting for Obama, and then pretty soon I couldn't, lie to myself with him anymore.
Right.
So it evolved from the Democrats, and I went with Bernie, and then it was when I started, really getting in the Bernie campaign where I was introduced to real progressives, and I started to hear about MMT. And at first, it was really confusing. I would read Ellis Winningham. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Not yet,
MMT economist. MMT economist from England.
Sure.
And he's a very great. If you want to laugh, he puts out the information with a lot of humor and keeps it lively, so it isn't so boring. But when I first started reading him, it was like it was a different language. Mind you, I'm a high school dropout. I took some college classes after when I was in the military, but I'm a high school dropout, so I had no economics, any real training. So it was like a different language. After a while, I started to find myself actually thinking in those terms that I never used before. And then things started to become clearer. Because the way MMT is, it's a non-ideological, non-partisan description of how a sovereign currency system operates.
How it works, When you said about, being a high school dropout, and I had no formal training in economics or anything like that, and yet nothing seemed to make sense to me from mainstream economics, whether it's neoliberal or left-wing, right-wing, any kind of way of describing what money is and how it works just never made sense to me until about a year ago. So
when first started,
when I read Seven Deadly Innocent Frauds, bang, everything started to make sense. The puzzle came together finally. So as you were saying.
The whole thing about this is once you start to understand the operational reality, this is just simple logic and scientific fact. There's no getting away. There's no arguing with, the preamble to the Constitution in America. There's no arguing with, bottom-up economics. When people want to talk about trickle down, the operational reality shows that trickle down leaves the bottom income distribution, the first to be fired in an economic downturn and the last to be hired in an economic uptick. So this leaves the bottom always in a depression state, and it pulls everybody's standard of living down. So when we look at it from the macro level, it's really easy to understand that's not the right way to do things. You balance a consumer-driven economy by spending at the bottom. Give people demand at the bottom. They need the services and the jobs of the educated and skilled above them. So demand naturally will travel up. It doesn't trickle down.
When you said you started out sort of right-wing, right? I've gone back and forwards for years, because I can see there's some values that those who typically describe themselves as more right have that are ultimately not bad values. Same goes in those that call themselves on the left. And I don't know if you've heard of a guy called Jordan Peterson. A lot of people from the right have come to him, and people from the left as well. But he's a smart guy. But I've been emailing him to try and get him to understand MMT, because he agrees that inequality, I should say, is a really serious problem, and it's plagued civilizations past and present. And I think in North American natives, they used to have, I think it was the Jubilee, where they'd redistribute the wealth, because they knew that after a certain amount of time it tended to accumulate toward the top, right? Now,
absolutely,
yeah. So guys like Jordan Peterson acknowledge that this happens and that it's a real problem. But here we have with MMT, we have the toolkit to say, well, we don't need to let that be a problem that becomes too serious, because it's more of a serious problem when you're constricting the money supply, which is the tokens we use to exchange goods and services. You restrict that, and in restricting it, it tends to float up toward the top. So the manifestation of that restriction is going to be, people being homeless.
One of the easiest ways that MMT will show us our fascist government works for the private profits of the 1% at society's expense. Now, I'm talking about America, but I'm sure it's the same in New Zealand.
Yeah, same thing, man. Yeah.
We target unemployment in America. Mm-hmm. So we're actually keeping a buffer stock of unemployed for capital to wage war on labor with.
Right.
It keeps all labor wages and working conditions down. This is why our wages have been stagnant since the 70s. While productivity, corporate profits, and cost of living are all at sky high.
Yeah.
And it's because of that. So that's what that does is it diminishes a big part of our purchasing power, and it gives a bigger share of GDP to the top 1%. That's where the income inequality is really pronounced, and you can see the mechanisms that allow it very easily. You know what I mean? When you look at a chart. Yeah.
Oh, look, I saw that chart where you see productivity with weight. I don't know if it was take home wages or whatever, but it goes up roughly on a par until about 1980. On 1980, productivity carries on up. Wages are pretty much flat from there on. And I don't know. I mean, over in the US, it was Reaganomics. I think I can't remember. It was the whole, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And then over here, we had a guy called Roger Douglas. He called it Rogernomics. And it all amounted to the same thing. The government, ours was 1984, it believed it had to pay its way like a business, It had to sell off all of its assets in order so that it wouldn't somehow go bankrupt. And since 1984, this country here, we have increased homelessness. A lot of the infrastructure, people used to work in forestry and all these railways was great. All of those things sort of fell to pieces. A lot of the infrastructure's disappeared,
we privatize the public space and deregulate everything. We starve the 99% of public spending to force us all into copious amounts of private just to consume production and survive. So when you go back to the wage gap, when you look at that map or that graph, there's like a 90-degree angle. There's a gap from productivity and wages. That gap has to be filled in one way or another, because that gap is representing people not spending in the economy. So we end up filling that gap with private credit, and because private credit always dries up, the booms, busts, and bailouts that only help the rich. And government has to move back into a big deficit position to help the rich. It doesn't do anything for everyone. So we say, instead of all that, Congress can always spend enough up front by targeting true full employment with a federally guaranteed living wage job for everyone who wants one. Then private credit becomes irrelevant. People aren't dependent on private credit to begin with. People aren't vulnerable to predatory lending to begin with. But people, all over, people have this tendency to blame the bankers.
I know.
In reality, the bankers they're not in charge of anything. It's our government that's in charge of everything.
I know they're just doing business. And
even bank credit is denominated in the government's unit of account. So, it's ultimately up to the government what goes on. If government spends enough into the economy, then there's not going to be that demand for bank credit. It's just that simple.
It is. It's really simple. I mean, I sort of think over here in New Zealand, everyone's talking about a minimum wage. And I always say it's a bit like saying, right, let's tie everyone's hands behind their back and then we're going to force them to juggle, because a friend of mine runs a business. He has about 20 employees. He's running a cleaning business. And, he makes enough to just pay his mortgage and get by through the week, but he doesn't make a huge amount of money. If he has to raise the wages of his workers to $20 an hour here, he'll have to close up shop. And then larger corporations will sweep up his contracts because they can ride out that storm. So, the minimum wage law is, I can see where they're coming from, but really the wage floor is set by, as you say, by a federal job guarantee or, essentially just public sector employment.
It would still have the same net effect for your buddy, though.
It does. Yeah, it means he's got more money. He's got less tax he has to pay. He's just less squeezed because he's kind of at the ground of the economy.
But he would still have, if in New Zealand they offered a federally guaranteed living wage job, well, then your buddy is going to have to beat that federal living wage to attract the workforce. Now he'll be, like you said, because there's so much more demand, he's going to be selling a lot more products, so he'll be making more money and be able to do that. Yeah,
it won't be hard for him, but it's just freeing up the private sector to have enough to meet its saving and purchasing needs.
Yeah, the biggest thing is the ruling class rules, no matter where you're at. The ruling class rules with an illusion, and they maintain that illusion with right-wing neoliberal lies.
Sure.
Okay, so MMT destroys those lies with simple logic and common sense. This is why we say MMT is the revolutionary vehicle to unite all sides for the public purpose first and foremost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's exactly what it does. And when you look at these different issues in the economy, no matter what you're talking about, it always will come back to the economics. And that's where MMT will expose the ruling class con game.
I think, I don't know if it was Margaret Thatcher or someone quoting maybe Milton Friedman, but there was some quote from the 80s and they said, the only way a government can spend is by borrowing or taxing. And it's just so completely untrue. It's just patently false.
Better too. I don't believe they actually believe that shit. And before you even get in that Peterson guy, is he related to Pete Peterson?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Because the Peterson Foundation in America is a sadistic organization.
Right.
They are all about they're all about saying that the national debt is evil and it's a burden on future generations.
Right. Sure.
We're all going to die.
Grandchildren have to pay it back. Yeah, man. I mean, I think
over.
No, Jordan Peterson's Canadian, so he's a different guy. But I like a lot of what he says about other issues, but I just want to get the guy's ear and tell him about this because so much of what he says indicates he doesn't understand this. He's always talking about tax, it's all taxpayer funded, everything's taxpayer funded, and we have a real problem with debt. It's just not true. Yeah.
How do you, when you first explain that, how do you go about telling people that taxes don't fund spending?
Right. Well, I'm probably a bit newer to this than you, so I'm probably going to get some tips more off you. But I'm just, I generally start with that in a country with a sovereign fiat money, floating money supply, taxes do not fund spending. Taxes have a purpose, but it's not to fund the spending. For a currency issuer, that's completely not the case. I always say, if you look at the cumulative deficit since the dollar began, well, that's how much currency is out there, whether it's cash or people's bank accounts or accounts at the Reserve Bank in New Zealand, our central bank. Well, that's what the money is. So, paying that back how would that look? That would be destroying all the currency in existence. So no one's got a dollar in a reserve account. So that's crazy. So there's no money. I mean, there's only then credit, but the credit would have nothing to anchor on if there's no currency. So it's like, you can't pay that back. So how's that a debt? It's not really a debt at all.
That kills that argument completely. When you tell them, the national debt is just all the dollars in existence.
Yeah, that's it.
the national debt was zero, we would have $0 in existence. That's the only way a national debt can be a burden on a sovereign government, on a monetarily sovereign government. And when I'm explaining taxes don't fund spending, I like to use a Monopoly game as a reference. You can't start a game of Monopoly. Dr. Stephanie Kelton always says this. You know, you can't start a game of Monopoly by collecting rent. Money always needs to be issued first. The same with our government. You know, you can't tax or sell bonds because taxing and bond sales, you know, we tax in dollars. We buy bonds with dollars. So dollars have to exist first. So the fact is federal spending funds taxpayers.
Absolutely.
Then tax or buy bonds. It's never vice versa at the federal level. And that usually gets them. And then you tell them taxes are about guaranteeing demand for the government's unit of account.
That's it.
Demand currency. That's the main purpose of taxes. The government imposes a tax, you know, merchants will accept the dollar or the unit of account because they know most people in that country will always need to pay their tax. So they'll know that those dollars will always be in demand. So they're not afraid to take them. You know, as a common, you know.
You have a really good way of putting it, man. I saw a lady at the shop the other day, and she asked me what I was up to, and I said, you know, talking about money, and you know, the other way I like to look at it is, you know, the private sector obviously needs money. We all want to save, we all want to pay off our mortgages. You know, we need currency for that. So every time the government has a budget surplus, that means it took out more money than it put in. So it's like, well, that means that as a whole, the net private sector lost that money. It's gone. Every time the government has a budget deficit, more money goes in. So it's the complete opposite of the way we see it.
Identity. Accounting, and that's what people don't know. They still think the Clinton surplus was good. I'm always telling them that. The surplus doesn't mean there's a big pile of cash there. It just means the government is starving the economy. They didn't spend the dollars into existence that the economy needs. So then we have to, you know, instead use more private debt, you know, to balance the economy. Like when you look at the Clinton surplus specifically, and people will say, well, the economy was doing so well. Well, first of all, it was obscured by the fact that people were in so much private debt. And because of that surplus, you know, the private sector had to drain their savings, and we had to, you know, our savings was wrapped up in our house for most of us. And so we had to leverage our houses. And then, you know, they had to deregulate the credit markets and make credit real cheap because they weren't spending dollars in. They were starving the economy with the surplus. So what happened was the financial markets started to sell these mortgages over and over and over again. And all these financial asset bubbles started to grow and grow and grow. And people thought things were okay, but, you know, because private credit always dries up, those bubbles eventually burst in the global financial crisis in '08. And then the government moved back into a big deficit position to bail out the top, you know, 1%. And the whole thing about this is, you know, we could have had so much more of a recovery. We spent billions in war and everything else. No one ever asks where that money's going to come from. No one ever worries about inflation when it comes to those things. You know, it's only when we want to spend on society where people say, oh, what about inflation? Or, you know, where's that money going to come from? You know, but we, you know, it's just ridiculous.
I don't know if this is a good way of describing it, but people say, well, you're going to get inflation. I don't know if this is a good way, but I always say, well, inflation in a nutshell is too much money chasing not enough goods. So there's not enough stuff out there, and you're just trying to chuck money at the problem. Well, this way, every time the government spends, it's not just chucking money out there, it's paying for some kind of useful work to be done, for some wealth to be created, whether it's getting unemployed people to build a road or railway or something. You know, you've then got this real wealth to correspond with the money that you introduced. So it's less likely to cause inflation. And as we say, historical infants.
It's about how the government spends. The deficit in and of itself doesn't matter. It's how that deficit is spent. If the government's spending to strengthen our productive capacity, you know, if they're spending on education, healthcare, green, sustainable energy, you know, these types of things, then, you know, our productive capacity is being strengthened. I always say it like the money part of the equation doesn't even matter. That's always infinite for the federal government. All that matters is we have real resources available to buy with that money. That's the only thing that matters. And inflation, like you said, this is demand when it outstrips supply. Too many dollars, chase too few goods, get inflation. So just the simple answer is if you increase your supply, you control inflation. So once you're at your maximum productive capacity, you simply tax extra demand. This isn't rocket science.
Not rocket science, no. And I always say people, a lot of people also because I also come from a kind of green background as well. So a lot of people in my circle of friends will say, oh, but you don't want endless productivity because that's just endless junk, or endless pollution. But it's not the case, because a lot of things that are productivity are really good for the environment, right? And I always use the example of a railway infrastructure. I mean, here in the country now in New Zealand, our railways are vastly underutilized. They haven't really been invested in or developed road rail interfaces and so on for probably 20, 30 years. So you build those road rail interfaces, and then all of a sudden goods can get hauled on rail a lot better and a lot more affordably than they can right now. So then you have less 18-wheelers on the highways, and then you don't have less damage on the roads. There's always things you can do that are really good for the environment and really good for the people, and you spend into that, you create good products and services that are really sustainable. It doesn't mean to say we just have to go keeping on making rubbish and products that are no good.
The whole thing is government doesn't have to worry about profit. That's the big thing. Government's job is the public purpose.
That's it.
General welfare. So government doesn't need to worry about profit. So your government would be free to invest in sustainable green energy if you wanted to. Sustainable farming, sustainable living, all of these different things. That's the point. MMT shows us how to have a resource-based shared economy.
And that's kind of really, really common sense stuff. I mean, I always go back to maybe when I was 13, 14, it puzzled my mind when they said, we can't do this because we don't have the money for it. As a 13, 14-year-old, I thought, well, if you've got all these people who would love to work, my dad was a builder, and I was always proud to see him building houses, a really real thing that people need, And so if you've got trees that you can turn into wood and you can make a house, and you've got all that growing there, and you've got people just sitting there because they don't have a number in their bank and they can't do anything, well, you just get it going, mobilize those people to, you could have a housing program, for instance, building, state houses. We used to have state houses built by the government, Well, right now we have a housing crisis. Let's let it roll, let it go,
that's the thing, man. The money is the part that utilizes and organizes the real resources of the nation.
That's it.
If you have the labor in place, you have people that want to do the work, you have the raw materials to build a road, and the only thing you're missing is money. It makes no sense to say we can't afford that road. That's the purpose of government and the purpose of money to begin with, is to utilize those resources in a way that everyone benefits from.
Got it, man. And the other thing people often say, well, that sounds like communism. I always say, well, to me, that's actually capitalism, because that's how capitalism works and how it works best. I mean, you've got capital, you've got your private sector, so. It's not communism. It's just like you want to have a balance between your government and your private sector.
But the thing is, the communism, people don't realize, is we have more in common with central planning than capitalist free markets. Okay, how government spends determines everything. Taxation and spending is the real means of production. This is what determines everything. So. Capitalism only exists in the private sector, and only to the extent that our socially owned government allows. Government owns the private sector completely with its power to impose tax and be the monopoly issuer of the only tax credit. So in that way, it's in that way, people, it's more like central planning, like China, communist China. Nobody even owns property in our countries. We all rent, we all pay tax. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, it's easier to see it in that context than it is in a free market context. The only free market really would be the black market. Government regulates and controls everything.
Sure,
but people don't like that.
I mean, that's that's the fact. That's how it works. I mean, ideologies aside, it's really hard to organize a country of 300 million or even 4 million, like down here, without some kind of structure. Like humans don't just sort of naturally self-organize into a perfect situation without some kind of structures. We need structures. So that's why, I'm pro-government. Government has worked in the past. It worked best when we didn't think it had to tie its hands behind its back,
And anybody, no matter how small the community is, there's always a pretty much, in essence, a government. Like I say, even a tribe of Indians or something, they still have, in essence, a government. They have a ruling structure, a leadership, and they have power structures.
Sure.
If the community doesn't keep that leadership working for the public purpose, then that leadership could be corrupt and work for their own private purpose at the community's expense. So, it's always the same. It isn't, government is just a tool. It's up to the people to force government to do its will, do its bidding. That's what people don't get. They government's horrible. It isn't government. It's we the people. We allow this stuff because we believe these lies.
And if we believe them, in Mosler's 7 Deadly Innocent Frauds, he talked about meeting with one of your, I can't remember, one of the guys going for president against Bush. Who was that, man?
Al Gore,
Al Gore. I can't remember if it was Al Gore, but Warren Mosler was sitting down with him and he explained to him about what the surplus and the deficit are, and he was like, wow, okay. And then he describes how next minute later, 5 minutes later, he's giving a speech on how we're going to spend the surplus, So, it's like maybe he understood it for like 10 seconds, but I figure this is maybe what went on his mind. Look, if I say that, I'm gone, man. That I'm a loony, and the media's going to just tear me to pieces. The public's going to think I'm an idiot. And so it is, as I say, it is, as you said, it's our responsibility to understand this. We understand this, and we're quite clear about it, and we expect our politicians to understand it. We demand that they understand it. This is what you're there for. This is what money is, and we want you to use it wisely, and serve our public purpose.
That's right. And we're not going to take any bullshit lies and scare tactics anymore as an excuse. We know we don't need to tax the rich in order for our government to spend and do its job.
Or even
cut the fence so government could spend and do its job. We know we don't want to end the Fed or kill capitalism. So government can do its job and spend. We need government to spend. That's priority one. Everything else is separate.
Well, I'd also say we can drop One thing I always say, quite a sudden change we could do is drop the value-added tax, which is right down at the bones of the economy. I mean, food and everything that everyone on the street spends, we have a 15% tax added onto that. Well, right off the bat, we could just drop that straight away. And if we need to introduce more tax, we can have a property tax at the other end, Right.
It's about equality. It's about taxing the rich for equality's sake. It's never about funding our government. So it never needs to be. We need to separate the taxing and spending fight. And when you think that you have to add in a tax to get government, we'll say, to have single payer. You've seen Bernie added in some pointless taxes to a single payer bill. And then there's all these Republicans that will not raise taxes. So that makes the bill DOA. It's dead on arrival. Now, if Bernie, now it seems like he's coming around with Stephanie Kelton and MMT. But if he would have realized that then, and he would have just put forward a clean spending bill, a single payer spending bill, no added taxes, there's a lot better chance Republicans would have signed it. Because believe it or not, even Republicans love their kids. We
Mm-hmm.
all love our kids.
Yeah.
We all want a better society. It's just some people, if they think that if they're going to have to pay more for other people, they're not going to want to do it. Once they realize that their taxes don't pay for my mistakes, then they're going to be less opposed to public purpose spending. So it removes all these artificial barriers and scare tactics and lies that keep us all divided and pitted against each other. So that and then that frees up a truly progressive agenda. You know, this frees up a progressive policy agenda because we don't have to worry about how you're going to pay for it. We know the government can pay for anything with a congressional decree.
Yeah.
You know, so all we got to worry about is the inflationary pressure. You know, is there going to be inflationary pressure? You know, so
when you say, you know, it frees up a humanitarian agenda, or you could call it what you want. A lot of people don't like that word progressive. A lot of conservatives don't like that word progressive. You could almost say it also frees up it could be a conservative agenda. I mean, from depending on how you define that word, but if you think of traditional values and, you know, this is as much a conservative thing as it is a progressive thing. That's all I'm trying to get at.
Conservative, but I mean, how can anybody be against progress? When we say progressive, that's progress. That's moving forward, making
things better.
If you're a conservative, then that might be, you know, it's still the same. We have the same goals. If you're a conservative, you still want to have a good society.
That's right.
You still want to have good hospitals, good health care. You just don't, you know, a lot of these people, they don't understand how the economy works. They think that the private sector and the free market dictate everything to the government. Right. And in reality, it's the other way around. You know, and for anybody to think that profit should be put above somebody's person or society, that to me, that is way more radical than anything that you'll ever hear me talk about. Because I talk about, you know, everybody being equal in the eyes of the law anyway, and everybody being able to have their human needs and human rights protected. That's not radical. When you say that, you know, 1% of your society should be able to amass all the wealth and keep everybody else living in abject poverty, you know, that's radical. That's capitalism. You know, when you allow other people to own the surplus value of other people's labor, you know, that's an exploitive thing at its roots. Now, we can make it better. We can, you know, we can make it not as exploitive. That's the government's job. Is to protect everybody.
And public, I mean, in terms of, sorry, I was going to say, in terms of the grandchildren paying it back, you know, like when you think about it, what is the real situation the grandchildren are going to inherit? You know, they're either going to inherit a healthy culture, a healthy society that you know cares about its citizens and helps them achieve their full potential in whatever endeavors they pursue, or you're going to have a society where people are really damaged, haven't had the chance to improve on themselves and then become a burden on the future generations because they're so unwell, their families have broken down, they live in a car, you know, they have no physical human health because, you know, they're deficient in food because they can't afford to buy, deficient in nutrients and all this stuff. So it's kind of like, well, the mindset of saying, well, that's, you know, the hard right-wing mindset, or hard neoliberal mindset, because it's just as much left as right almost, of saying, well, those people just didn't work hard enough, or they didn't try hard enough, or, you know, they're just the Darwinian natural selection of those that didn't make it. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me because, you know, you've tied their hands behind their back, you've starved your economy, you've starved your communities of the resources because they don't have the dollar to equate the resources to, you know, so they're sitting there with their hands tied behind their back. They're going to get hurt. They're going to get damaged. Well, they're not going to stop having children. I mean, they're going to have kids because, you know, that's all they can think of doing, and they're going to starve even more and they're going to get even more damaged. So it's like, it kind of, there's no ideology that can justify this and say, well, that's a good thing. If you slow down.
All of civil, it drags all of the standard of living down.
That's right. And then the damage is real. It's not just nominal. It's real and it's cumulative, and it affects every facet of the society. And like I started a political page here in New Zealand. Maybe one day, if there's enough support, I'll run for office one way or another. But I'm trying to do a bit of a Warren Mosel. I'm just putting myself out there and saying, well, here I've got some ideas. If you guys want to have a politician that actually understands the stuff, will support me, and I'll do it. And a lot of people have come to my page because they don't like identity politics, and they don't like this group fighting against this group and this division against here and here. And the way I see it, like all of that stuff, all that divisiveness, all that identity politics is really ultimately a consequence of this, because a lot of people come from the men's rights and men's movement, trying to help men be healthier and better fathers and more participating in their communities. Well, 30 years ago we had a lot of really good employment that men could get into, and men generally love to work. So all this stuff, this is going to help gender politics. It's going to help everything, because you'll have men with more self-respect working in jobs that pay a livable wage. We can then potentially come back to a single income family again, which is going to be great for the kids. The kids aren't going to be shipped off to daycare and they don't know their mum or dad, because both of them are trying to work full-time or as many part-time jobs as they can. I mean, it brings everything back, man. It brings the family back. It brings balance in our communities. Gets, the divisiveness is going to disappear. Yeah.
And that's what neoliberalism does. It is a right-wing it's a right-wing economic system, okay? And that's exactly what it does, is it privatizes the public space, and our government is intentionally targeting unemployment. And, that's systemic poverty, intentional systemic poverty. So you can't really say these people are just lazy, even if every single worker had the best job skills and they had the most motivation. We're still going to have systemic poverty because that's the way the government wants it. Right now, the Federal Reserve in America is they're raising interest rates to create even more unemployment. And at the same time, you see the politics. You see people like Trump and these other people saying, we got to cut welfare or make welfare recipients have to work. If they want welfare benefits, they should have to work. Well, the point is they would much rather work. They don't want to work food stamps. They want living wage work. The point is our government intentionally targets unemployment. Right now, the Fed is trying to create more unemployment. It's a statistic to say get a job if you want to work under these circumstances. I mean, people don't understand that. And so and I'll talk to people on the left and the right that'll have these same criticisms. And they'll say, oh, well, that's true. If you want welfare, you should have a job. You should be out, working and doing this and providing for yourself. And I say, of course. And everybody wants, anybody that would rather have a $200 welfare check instead of a living wage job, then they have a mental imbalance anyway. They're mentally disabled anyway. And so, there's no other way about that. But, and more than that, another thing is people don't understand that when you allow people to sink to the bottom without a safety net, when you allow people to be starving and hungry and in pain, society becomes dangerous for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Civility goes out the window when you're starving. That's why it's called the general welfare, the public purpose. This is about everybody's welfare. If you want to be able to enjoy the park with your kids, then you better, have some more compassion, when you're talking about food stamp recipients, in my eyes.
Yeah. Oh man. I'm just wondering, what are the obstacles to discussing this? One of the things, I think people are very emotional about even the whole topic of money. It's a really emotional topic because, they carry their own childhood traumas around the messages they had about money from their family and what they were taught, how hard money is to come by and how important it is to be careful with your money. So they're carrying a lot of those messages that apply to a household, and they're carrying them into the understanding of a currency issuer, like a government. There's a totally different situation. And, it's funny because about maybe 3 years ago, I really thought government had to run itself like a business. And so I wrote this post about how it ought to do this. And a lot of people more on the right, I guess, loved what I'd written. They thought it was great, Now it's completely misunderstanding the reality of what money is. And yet I was that guy. I might go and read that discussion again, because one guy was trying to say, well, it's not quite like that, Warren. And I was in that position of saying, oh, well, it is. It has to be. I was quite strident that I'm must be knowing what I'm saying. I'm a fairly smart guy and I've thought about this, but I was completely wrong. And that's what I think one of the things we come up against, different ways that people don't really want to consider the fact that they've understood this incorrectly.
If you ever heard of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So people will actually experience pain, when they realize, like when I first realized it. I remember I was actually sick to my stomach when I thought about this, because it meant poverty, unemployment, imperialism. It was all just political choices.
Sure.
I used to serve my country. I thought that, America was the land of the free, and we were the good guys in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it completely changed my view, and it made me sick
mm-hmm.
to understand, how easy it would be to have a better world for all.
Mm-hmm.
And yet people just don't want to, because of profit for a very small select few,
mm-hmm.
And so everybody else got to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the most important thing
mm-hmm.
that we could be doing,
mm-hmm.
is talking about money.
Yeah.
And interject this logic everywhere it's needed, because like you said, we will see these lies and these scare tactics all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
When people don't understand something, they tend to make up and fill in the details with just fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we're up against. But
mm-hmm.
if you could try to keep your emotion out of it, that's what I try to do. I try not to
mm-hmm.
get, even when I'm getting called names and different
mm-hmm.
things like that, I stick with the facts, and I'll say, look, whatever, call me whatever you want. But the fact of the matter is, do you think you could start a game of Monopoly by collecting rents? Because it's impossible. If you don't have to like me, who cares about me? But you have to admit that you can't start a game of Monopoly by collecting rent, and so government must spend dollars into existence before it could take taxes back, or it could sell bonds, and that's just simple logic.
Yeah.
You don't need to be a PhD to understand that. And so when you and then you also got to be very repetitive, I've noticed. And say, you got to repeat the most important points throughout your talk, because this stuff has been ingrained in us for so long the wrong way.
Yeah.
It takes that repetitiveness
mm-hmm.
make us think about things, and then before the light bulb starts to come on, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, got you. The other angle that comes at me is probably more from toward the left of the spectrum. People will say, you've heard of the positive money movement, from that direction. They'll say, well, yeah, that would be really great, but for that we would need a new sovereign money or a social credit. And I always say, well, it's kind of that we got that, guys. That's right there. That's called our central bank. It's like every time
nationalize the dollar.
Yes, they say, we need to nationalize the dollar, create a sovereign currency. And hang on, guys, have a look out here, because every time that government deficit spends from our central bank, our Reserve Bank of New Zealand, every time it does that, well, that's what it did. It sent social credit out there. Every time the government pays someone to build a road or a school, that's your social credit. It's there. We just don't know it. And I think a lot of people, maybe they like the idea of change, but they like it as an abstract concept rather than a reality that we can just get going with and roll our sleeves up and do it. And I think that's a little bit of it, maybe. If they say we can only do it if we completely change the system, then it's like, well, then they can just keep that in their imagination and never actually do it, right?
It's a way for them to sleep easy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it kind of diminishes their responsibility.
Yeah, it makes them small because it's the whole system's so far out that I can just complain about it and know that it's never going to change. But it's like when I figured out that we already have this, I'm the opposite. I'm like, wow, man, we've got to go with it now because we've got it. We've got the social credit. We've got the sovereign money. We just need to just understand that. So that's really hopeful. I mean,
the other thing, positive money, if you notice, they don't understand the way federal finance works. They think that banks lend deposits. Yeah. They think that, fractional reserve lending needs to be.
Yeah.
They're out there fighting for things that don't even exist. Mm-hmm. That's less power, less time you're devoting to real issues that need to be worked on. Mm-hmm. And when I'm talking about the government, I like to make sure people understand when I say, dollars are infinite. So I'll say it's just a taxation and spending is just a social construct. Mm-hmm. It's a means of production to drive real resources from the private sector, public sector, for the public purpose, for the society. So God needs real resources like military, infrastructure, legal systems, all these real resources the government needs for society's sake. Mm-hmm. And how does it do that? Well, we don't take slaves anymore, like Warren Mosler always says. They don't you over the head and you wake up at the next day. We do it with debt instruments. Yeah. Government will impose a tax on the private sector that instantly creates unemployment. People are then willing to sell their goods and labor $4 to survive. Yep. So this is how government prevents society using paid employment. So when people understand that, then they understand, then government could, a federal job guarantee is no big deal. Government would just be paying people like it always does to provision society. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing is if government is paying doctors to administer health care, we don't have to charge the end user. If government is paying teachers to educate people, we don't have to charge the end user. These public goods are socially valuable in and of themselves. That's our productive capacity. We need smart kids to make our real resources of tomorrow. We need healthy populations to produce our needs of tomorrow. So after I put it like that, people start to understand a little bit better.
Yeah. When I started understanding this, it just sort of hit me. This is the big thing, like it was kind of like the big thing I've been waiting for. I grew up, I used to watch a lot of science fiction, read a lot of science fiction books, and I kind of had a vision for I could see humanity reaching the stars, metaphorically speaking, just doing things better. And, we can make this technology that we can talk across the country with video now. Humans are very resourceful beings, we can do a whole lot of stuff. And so I've I've been disappointed to see since neoliberalism, a lot of things stagnating, like just things going backwards from how I envisioned them ending out from reading, Isaac Asimov or whatever. Now we're seeing the railways fall to pieces. We're seeing, we have the means and the technology, but it's not being used for healthy homes, for roads that aren't full of potholes. Where we live now, the roads are getting worse and worse. So, when I discovered this, it's like, well, this is kind of like getting back on the tracks for our planet, and so everything else is kind of a little bit peripheral to me. It's like if this is the main thing I want to get out there.
Exactly. And all problems in society have their roots in economics, and they have their macroeconomic solutions.
Yeah. And a lot of people say, well, there's no such thing as a free lunch, so that can't be true. And so we'll all just carry on suffering.
Yeah, you just tell them, no, we're not talking about a free lunch. We're talking about people working. We're talking about people working.
Yeah.
This isn't free stuff. If I'm working, I'm working. I'm not getting a free handout. I'm working.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite. It's the opposite of a free lunch. I mean, you see, it's like, well, this is, you're right. That's a good way to respond to that.
What does the right always do? They're always saying the left are moochers. We want everything for free. We want everything handed to us. We want everything for free. And then we come up with this federal job guarantee. And now all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, that's horrible. We want to give everyone a job. God forbid. Watching Fox News the other day, and they called it free stuff, a federal job guarantee, free stuff. And I said, how can that be free stuff? The government is paying people for service rendered. Is it free stuff if I go to the military? Is it free stuff if a private contractor gets a contract with the military? Is that free stuff?
Yeah, right.
I mean, so it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
These people just, we need to interject logic when these talking points come up, when these people start to say these lies and these, scare tactics. I also wanted to talk about, we didn't clarify about the debt. And when I talk about these things, I like to say the solution too, and the reality. And so the reason why the national debt is never a burden is because when you're talking about the national debt, we're not talking about the other side of the ledger. Okay, sectoral balances have two sides. You have the government and the non-government. So any debt of the government is an asset of the non-government, right? So if the government deficit's 10, by accounting identity, our non-government has an asset of 10, a surplus of 10.
Yep.
And so how can that be a burden? The national debt is just all the dollars in existence. That's never a burden on a monetarily sovereign nation in any way. No matter what the interest payments are or anything about it. The only way it could be a debt or a burden is if we don't have enough of it. That's it. It would never be a problem. And even when you're a net importer, it's still not a problem. For us in America, we're net importers. People think that that's a bad thing. They have us wanting to compete with the third world. For starvation wage jobs, making widgets in a factory. And I tell people, we don't need to do that. Our trade deficit allows us to raise our standard of living. We don't need those bad jobs. Our jobs are then free to focus on society. What the trade deficit means is, for America, we get the real resources of the whole world for our infinite dollars. And people think that's a bad deal for us. That's not a bad deal in any type of way. That's a great deal. The only thing that means is our government must offset that foreign leakage. Our government needs to replace those dollars that that are going out of our economy. If we're buying the goods, say, of China, then those dollars are leaving our economy, and they're in China's Fed account, and they're not in our economy. So our government needs the deficit spend to offset that leakage, make sure that people have the dollars that they need to do business.
Sure.
So it's not a bad thing. It just means that our government needs to respond properly. That's all.
I mean, I kind of think there are some, I don't know, maybe might be interesting to hear your thoughts on this, but I kind of think there are some instances where imports aren't necessarily a good thing, and it's more a matter of legislation. A lot of products coming in can be because they're made very cheaply, they're very toxic. In New Zealand, we import a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff that breaks really quickly. It's really badly made and it ends up in a landfill. And there's things like firecrackers from China. They're full of heavy metals. There are when you allow all kind of stuff in. But again, a lot of that, as I say, I mean, there are some. I guess I'm probably a bit of a working class background. I like the idea of making good quality items and doing like we used to make amplifiers in this country, and they were really good amplifiers. And, you know, I'm a musician, so a lot of musicians they're really sought after to get those old Jensen amplifiers from the 80s or 70s. Now everything's probably is a lower standard, and it's cheaper, and it comes from China. If we had enough deficit spending, well, a lot of those industries might still be going because people have the money to spend locally on a higher quality product, and a lot of those jobs might still be here, but they kind of shrunk the money supply, and then of course the cheaper bidders, then, you know, we can't afford to buy stuff that we make ourselves. I mean, there are sometimes, you know, some of those products. You said making widgets. I don't like a lot of junk products that are no good, but there are a lot of good things that, you know, I don't know, air conditioning units or fridges, and, you know.
My general point is, you know, there isn't really a huge need for us to do all of those things. Now, there might, if you have a specialty thing like you said, amps, Jensen amps, you know, then that may be something that, you know, you might, if you had a company and, you know, you made good amps, you might still be able to sell them right now. The whole thing is your society doesn't need those jobs. You know, your government can have a federal guaranteed job for every person, and their work can focus on society directly. There's all kinds of different ways, from, you know, focusing on the infrastructure to education. There's a myriad of work that right now I venture to say I know in America that isn't getting done. So I'm guessing it's the same in New Zealand. There's a ton of work that's not getting done. And you know, so there's never a shortage of work that needs done.
And for those, like, you know, Rust Belt workers, I mean, in the middle states in America.
That's where I'm from. I'm from Rust Belt. I'm from Pennsylvania.
Right.
And
okay.
Right by Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Right.
And it's the Rust Belt, and the city is completely run down. Our water's nasty. You get the shits if you drink it. You know,
right.
We had tons of steel mills in through here, and then, you know, I think Chinese steel, you know, was a lot cheaper, and that put all of the American steel out of business. And, you know, and people to this day say, oh, well, we need to get those jobs back, and well, there's nothing we could do to get those jobs back. You know, we can't make our steel cheaper than China, because that would mean that we'd have to, you know, violate human rights. We'd have to violate labor rights, you know, and pay people too little. You know, it's just not worth it. We can instead, our jobs can focus directly on society, raising everybody's standard of living. You know, let robots do the precarious work. Let third world nations do the widgets, you know, things like that. If you have a specialty product, if you think that China makes shitty amps, and you think you can make good amps, then you would probably be able to get a market share and stay in business anyway, because there's a need for a good quality product, you know, like you're saying. So, you know,
But I don't think it's possible under the current situation where, as I say, the government's tying its hands behind its back, not spending into the economy. So, because it's not doing that, what I'm saying is my high quality amps are. There's not enough discretionary income left over after people have paid their food. I mean, okay, I'm a musician, right? So I've got a record I'm going to finish this year, hopefully, and I think it's really good music. You know, my few friends of mine like it. You know, so CD sales, I guess they've kind of dropped, because if people aren't paying they aren't getting petrol in their car, and they're not paying their bills, they've got less money they're going to spend on art, you know, or literature. So so that's kind of a little bit about it as well. And so if I was making a quality amplifier, yeah, probably most people aren't going to be able to afford it. But if we didn't feel we had to completely suck the private sector dry by trying to balance the budget, there would be a bit more surplus discretionary income left over. So I'm just thinking that's part of it. Because I mean, I know what you're saying about the third world, but I'm kind of I like the idea of nations looking after themselves, but I don't like the idea of Bangladesh having these sweatshops. I mean, what I'm saying, it's up to Bangladesh how they run their country, but I don't like the situation of our slaves being just exported to Bangladesh.
No, I agree there. Right. I think that our trade agreements need to protect labor wherever it's at.
Sure.
Absolutely. But it's difficult to say exactly how it should be, because there's always going to be somebody that's getting the short end of the stick. And so,
Right, but it doesn't have to be as short as it is, man.
Yeah, exactly. And when you keep going back to the economic stabilizer effect of the federal job guarantee, the counter-cyclical nature of it all, and so I want to make sure that people understand, this is a way. It's a way to make the private sector hire more people. When you're starting to have an economic downturn and the private sector is laying people off, if those people get laid off, they no longer have an income. They can no longer buy production. So it's a downward spiral. It always requires the federal government to step in. We already have what's called economic stabilizers through welfare, food stamps, unemployment, all these different things that we pay to keep people unemployed. And it costs a lot of money. So we can have a better, a much more superior economic stabilizer through a federally guaranteed living wage job program. And what that will do is, instead of these people losing their income when the private sector downsizes, the federal job guarantee will expand. It'll hire those people up and they'll keep their income. And so they can keep buying production, and that shortens recessionary periods and it protects the bottom against the worst of the recessionary harm,
It's kind of like, you create a tax in your unit of account, essentially, as you said before, to get the private sector to be unemployed in that unit of account, to have to do something to get it. And of course, because it's having to pay it, then that means the private sector can't afford to employ as many people as it did before. So then people line up on the steps of government and say, well, what do we do? You brought us here by this tax, so here we are to get the tax. And they've just taxed so much, but they didn't need that many people. So there's people left over, and that's your unemployment. And then they're damaged long term. Either they're damaged, emotionally, because they're just sitting around, not engaging in life. And they're damaged from the perspective of the private sector that doesn't want to rehire them because they've just been sitting around. And that's where your federal job guarantee helps with that situation. They're back in the workforce.
It's how they keep us the precarious class.
Right.
And when labor's insecure, when you're worried about getting fired, and you have to put up with discriminatory work practices, you have to put up with starvation wage jobs, you have to put up with all this BS. Okay, when you have a federally guaranteed living wage job program, that forces the private sector to up their game. Okay, now you're no longer dependent on just them. If they don't pay you right, you could always go to the public sector with a living wage job. So, that keeps everybody honest. It makes sure that the people don't get exploited as much. I had a good point I wanted to make, and I completely forget what I was going to say. So,
if it comes to you, man, I remember now what I wanted to ask you. So we hear a lot about this basic income guarantee or universal income and so on, and that's getting pushed out there quite a lot. And as I'm trying to say, a federal job guarantee or a job guarantee is a far superior option, because it's not just throwing numbers at the problem. It's mobilizing labor for doing real things, not just digging holes in the ground and filling them, but real things that benefit the community. That's a real good idea. It's helping people do what they really want to do. I think there was a trial done in South America, and a job guarantee trial, and they asked people what was the main value that they got out of this, and the income was way down, about number 5. It was feeling like you're contributing to your communities, doing something that has a real meaning. All those things were way up on the list. So a number in a bank account, that's way down there. This is a better idea than just the universal basic income. And then people say, oh, but there's nothing to do, because robots do everything. Well, yeah, but it's like, well, there's always something you can do, and it doesn't have to be horrible, physical. As you say, if we can get robots and automation doing the really dangerous, nasty work, there's still a lot of really great things that human inventiveness and creativity want to do.
There's tons of stuff, and when the day comes where there's no jobs for humans to do, great.
Yeah. Well, then we can play our guitars or whatever, man.
Yeah, exactly. But then we would have to, take back the means of production in the private sector, because if everything was automated and people didn't have to work, we couldn't have a for-profit private sector, 1% of the population having the means of production, because nobody else would be able to have the needed things that they need to live. The only way it would work would be to nationalize everything at that point. That's if there's no work to be done.
Yeah, it's kind of, look, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. Everyone said, "Oh, we're going to have a 20-hour work week." I mean, 100 years ago, but here we are. People are working more, if anything. So, man, I mean, we've got a long way to go before we've got nothing to do. We've got a massive long way to go.
Right now, actually, in the private sector, the automation doesn't make up even half of private sector production. So why are we talking about this? And when you want to talk about a UBI doesn't offer anybody a ladder out of poverty. A UBI doesn't kill the existing capitalist power structures like a federal job guarantee does. A UBI doesn't offer a ladder out of poverty like a job guarantee does. A UBI is really a right-wing neoliberal Trojan horse to privatize the public space with a small lump sum amount of money. And because you're just adding demand and not supply,
then you get inflation.
It's inflationary. So this is the thing, that small payment that they give you will
is less and less. So no,
you end up worse off. Plus, they destroy the existing social safety net. So you would end up worse off than where you're at. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, I get that, man. These are some of the things people throw at me. UBI.
I get it all the time. So we have to. Whenever you're talking about this stuff, I fully expect to be talking about inflation and UBI and all this different type of stuff. So absolutely.
Yeah. Oh man, it's been really good chatting with you, man. A little bit about your background. You said that you're a veteran. Is that right?
I'm a Navy veteran. I went to the Navy right after 2001 for a few years. I got hurt and had a few spinal surgeries, and now I'm a disabled veteran, and I'm a single father. So I just do my own thing. Yeah.
And look, I haven't read too much of your posts. I read you were talking about. I guess you could call it neocolonialism. A lot of the actions in foreign countries. I mean, we're part of it here as well. We go along usually with UK, NATO. What's that?
I call it for-profit imperialism.
For-profit imperialism. Yeah, I mean,
that's America's brand anyway.
Yeah, right. And it's as I'm sure we'll both agree, it's just not necessary.
Yeah, that's exactly right. For-profit, anything for-profit is not needed. So, we don't need to be going around toppling Libya because they don't want to use dollars.
Right.
If they don't want business with us, who cares? We don't need them. If worst come to worst, America can produce everything it needs right here. We can invest in our invest in green, sustainable energy. We can invest, anything oil could do, hemp can do better. There's a million ways to do things. New Zealand can too. There's all kinds of different things that you can invest in to make yourself more sustainable. Even local communities. You think about a local community investing in a wind farm or a solar farm, and then even issuing local currency. Their own local currency and to different people, and telling people they could pay their taxes with that, or they could pay their utility bill with that. And because you're getting free electric, you know, anyway, from your wind farm or solar farm. You know, this is a way to increase a local city or local government's purchasing power without going and begging the federal government. You know, I could see a thing where a local government goes out and gets homeless people to go and clean up the roads or something and gives them these local tax credits. You know, that they can go and local businesses and get food or something. The local business will take them because they could pay their tax or they could pay their utility bill. You know, so it's a way to jumpstart a local economy.
We could do that. Yeah, I'm just saying we could also do that federally or nationally, and like in a country like New Zealand. We're only about the size of Oregon in the States. You know, we're a small 4 million people. You know, so I mean, I kind of think we're like a local situation for what you're used to.
Even from the state level, I mean, I'm talking even like a little city level, local city, local level. But yeah, absolutely, it's always best for the federal government.
Yeah, I mean, if our municipal councils could get a federal, you know, a per capita grant, you know, and they can then use that for doing these things. Well, that's the same thing, because that unit would count as a tax credit, so it's essentially a tax credit.
That's at the federal level. But my point is the local government. Sometimes federal politics are you know, they're tricky. So sometimes this is something a local government can do by itself without the federal government.
Yeah,
because they're going to be collecting taxes either way, local, municipal tax.
Right.
You know? So my point is, once you learn MMT, modern monetary theory, a whole host of options become available. And really, you know, a human agenda, like you say, a humanitarian agenda becomes possible.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, man. So just to clarify, so you, in terms of federal job guarantee, I mean, you can have it. I think it was Pavlina. Sorry, I can't remember her name. Yeah. She said something like, it could be, you know, funded federally, but organized locally. You know,
locally administered, federally funded.
Sure. Simple.
But it's too clear. You know, every the way they talk about it is there'll be one part of it that's a big federal public works part. And say, you know, for huge public works things like
like railways or whatever.
Things like that. That will be done at the federal level, you know. But then the majority of the jobs will be created by the individual communities. Yeah, sure. And they'll decide what's important to them. Now, I heard somebody the other day saying that's going to be a problem. There's all these different politics at the local level, and you know, some neighborhoods that got more money are going to get preferential treatment. And I try to tell them, we the people make this possible because the federal job guarantee restores democracy. If your city or your local government isn't investing in what you think should be investing in, if it doesn't value its people, then you could simply get up and leave, knowing you have a federally guaranteed living wage job waiting for you wherever you go. And then that local substandard city will lose its tax base and their ability to operate. So what this does is it makes local cities, local governments, it makes them accountable to their people. They have to work to keep their people happy. So it restores democracy. And that's a problem that works itself out.
It makes sense, man. I mean, really common sense stuff. I was going to say MMT, modern money truth, would be what I'd call it, because this is no theory. I mean, okay, some of the things we're talking about are theoretical, but at its core, we're looking at the operational reality of what money is, how it comes into being, how it goes out.
Scientific theory is fact, right? Gravity is a scientific theory. You know what I mean? But I don't see anybody questioning if they jump off a roof, they're going to fall and die. You know, no, that's operational reality. The operational reality of gravity is if you drop an object, it falls. The operational reality of our economy is sectoral balances don't lie. If the government spends dollars into existence, those dollars are an asset of the non-government or the debt of the government. That's a humanity. That's a scientific fact. You know, there's no opinion. You know?
Got you, man. All right, Rocco. Really, really good. Thank you very much for all the work you're doing. Like us, you know, in the US and beyond. You know, you're getting the idea out there. And I mean, I just think, you know, I'm kind of a bit of an optimist. You know, this is a small country here. As I said, we're the size of Oregon. You know, if we can, it might be easier for a smaller country to change that, to develop its understanding of what money is. So that's kind of my priority now. I want to get as many of these people in this country understanding it, and maybe we can. You know, I've written letters to the politicians. They probably haven't read them, but just trying to get the population, the public, understanding it to that point, that tipping point where it's common knowledge. You know, and then
and if New Zealand can actually get this going, if they can actually get the federal jobs guarantee implemented, then you could serve as the pilot program for every nation.
Yeah,
you know, it would serve as the template for every nation, and we can all point to you and say, "Hey, look at New Zealand; they're doing it.
They did it. Yeah,
people are happy. Their system, they're rebuilding their country.
Yeah,
you know, their people aren't starving. You know, and so give us ammo." Because this ultimately is an international labor, you know, movement. We are all in this together.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
That's why I come on.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. No, I can't. As I think Warren Moses said, once you get this, you don't go back. You know, no one goes back. You know, you don't go back to not understanding it. So
you can't make a pickled cucumber again.
Right. Yeah. So our job is just like one by one, we get more and more people getting it, and they're not going to go back. And hopefully they're going to be like me and you, and they're going to say, well, this is so big, I've got to get someone else knowing it. And then it snowballs, and eventually it's like, well, this kind of lifts our species literally out of a dark age, in much the same way as when they went off the gold standard, lifted out of the depression in the 30s, you know. And now we've entered into this kind of staggering along depression that's not quite as bad as the depression back then, but it's the same kind of thing. It's just staggering along.
Yeah, it's really very close to the same thing.
Right.
If you look from that Great Depression to the #1 world superpower in the world by deficit spending to invest in our own society. You know, and so we could do that again. We don't need to go have a war against Germany. We could have a war against poverty.
A war against damaged society, you know. I mean, just let's get it back.
Pollution,
right. Yeah, you name it, man. Yeah. Okay, man.
Thanks a lot, buddy.
Thanks, Rocco. Okay, talk to you soon.
Yeah, I'd like to do this again sometime.
Yeah, it was good. Appreciate it, mate. Okay, have a good evening. See you, man.